Make sure that you have the magazine tutorial folder copied to your computer, and inside there's just going to be one single image, and we're going to be creating all the rest in Photoshop. So let's open up Photoshop. We're going to go to File, New, and let's give it a name. Last name, first initial, and we'll call this Mag Test. Make sure that your unit of measure is set to inches, and we want a width of 8.5 and a height of 11. Our resolution should be set to pixels per inch, and we want a value of 150. And then we can click OK. And now we have our new document, and we're ready to start adding content. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our cover image. So we're going to go to File, Open. I'm going to select the cover photo, click Open. It'll open up in its own tab, so we're going to click on that tab, drag down and to the right. Make sure that our Move tool is the active tool, and I'll move my palette closer. Click on the cover photo JPEG and drag over into the new document. And then just take a moment to reposition it about like that. Let's also rename this layer so it's more descriptive. So I'm going to double click where the name is. It should highlight, and we'll call this Cover Pic. Press Enter to lock in that name change. And now we're ready to start adding our type. The first thing we'll add is the name of the magazine, which will sit on the top. So we'll select our Type tool. And just a reminder that there are different versions of the Type tool, and we want to use Horizontal Type tool. And we know that we have a certain amount of options we can choose that appear along the top of the window. But today what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Window menu, and we're going to select Character. Before we start adding our text, maybe just do a quick check to see what your character palette says. It should indicate a typeface. Perhaps choose a point size that isn't absolutely huge, like 500 or 1000. And maybe make sure that the color is set to something like black, and we can click on that color chip right there. And if you click in the bottom left corner, it really won't matter where the color ramp is positioned. This is always going to be pretty much full black. So we're going to use the Type tool two different ways. And the first way is simply by positioning our cursor approximately where we want our type to sit and clicking once. We should see the cursor flashing, and then we can type out the name of the magazine. And of course, if we select our Move tool now, we can reposition it anywhere. But it is way too small for a nameplate. So we're going to reselect our text. And the easiest way to do that in Photoshop is not to select the text tool and try and click and drag over it, because sometimes that accidentally creates extra empty text layers. Instead, we're going to double click on the T connected to the piece of type that we want to select. By now we should only have one type layer, so that should be easy to figure out which T you need to click on. So we're going to double click on the T. And when we do that, it automatically selects our text for us, and now we can choose what typeface we want to use. And I'm going to suggest you choose something nice and bold and very kind of clean and simple. I already know what typeface I'm going to use, so I'm just going to get that done. And you might want to pause for a moment and make a choice of your own. The next thing we want to do is we want to make this a lot bigger. We want this to pretty much take up the entire top of the magazine. And how large you'll be able to make it will really depend on the typeface you chose, and of course the number of characters. So I'm just going to click into the field where it says the point size of the type, and I'm going to just hold Shift and use my up arrow key so I can jump up point sizes in 10-point increments. And one more, two more. Before I do anything else, I'm going to select my Move tool and just reposition this so that it's centered, and I'm giving it some breathing room at the top. I don't want it touching the top or even just being a little too close. It feels a little claustrophobic. So I'm just going to pull it down a little bit so I've got some breathing room all the way around the top and the left and right hand edges. Now we're going to add some color. So I'm going to reselect this piece of text by double clicking on the T in the layer palette. And then I'm going to click and select the first 3 letters and change the color. I'm going to click on the color chip in the character palette, and I want a blue color. And what's nice is, notice I can see how that color is changing. I can see how it relates to the rest of the colors in the image. And it's way too light, so I'm going to choose sort of a nice blue and click OK. And then I'm going to select the last 3 letters, click on the color chip, and for this I'm going to choose an orange. You can make different color choices, but what you want to do is you want to make sure that there's a lot of contrast between the colors that you've selected for the type and the background so it's easy to read. Contrast. And I'm going to reselect my move tool, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now we're ready to add our blurbs to our cover. So we're going to reselect our type tool, but this time instead of just clicking and typing, we are going to click and drag and create a container for our text to sit in. And before I even start to type, we're going to use the character palette to make a few changes. I'm going to change the point size to 30, and I'm going to change the typeface to Arial. And instead of clicking and holding and dragging until I find Arial, I can just type out the first few letters of its name, and I'm going to select Arial Regular. And then I'm going to start typing a sip of summer. Select my move tool and take a look at how my type is looking. It's nice and clean and it's legible, but I think we can improve on it a little bit. The first thing I'm going to want to do is make it bolder. So I'm going to double click on the T in my layer palette, and I'm going to change it from regular to bold. Another thing I want to change is how much space there is between the lines of text. The amount of space between lines of text is called leading, and I want to tighten that up. So I'm going to go over here to my character palette, and if I let my cursor hover over that, you have an area that allows you to set the leading. Right now it's at auto, which means that it's based on a percentage of whatever the point size of the type is. So as the type gets bigger, the leading value increases as well. What I want to do is I want to take control of that situation. I'm going to do that by just randomly selecting any one of these preset values. And then I'm going to change it by clicking in the field and using my up or down arrow keys to adjust that value. And you can see how a bigger value increases the amount of space, and if I start moving down, it tightens that up. So my goal is not to have it too tight so the letters are overlapping. I want to tighten up my leading so that those 2 lines of type really sit as a unit on the page. I'm going to press enter once I'm happy with the way that looks, and I'm going to reselect my move tool just so I can take a look at those changes, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now we're ready to add another cover blurb. So again, we're going to keep these in their separate text containers, and I'm going to click and drag and create a new container. And I know this is going to hold more words, so I'm going to make it a little wider and a little deeper than our first one. And this one is going to read 2018 Kiddos Summer Camp Guide. I'm going to change the width of my container to see if I like the way the text runs and flows in this little area better, if it has more space or less space. I'm going to reselect my move tool. As I'm adding my blurbs, notice that I'm sort of instinctively looking for places to align it to create a nice structured layout. And the easiest place to line it up to is the edge of this K. We're going to add one more blurb. So I'm going to reselect my type tool, and I'm going to click and drag down here. And this one is going to read, Keeping Summer Fun. Now I've placed this type in a very dark area of the image, so keeping that text black is not going to work. And in fact, we're going to make a few other changes to help make it stand out. So I'm going to press Command A to select all, so it selects all the text in that container. And I'm going to change the color so it's easier for me to see. Oh, and it also lets me see a typo, so I'm going to get rid of that extra G. Press Command A again. And I think what I want to do is I want to run this all caps. So I don't have to retype it. With my caps lock key in place, I can use the character palette to change it to all caps. And that saves me a lot of typing. And then we're going to tweak this a little bit, because even though if I select my move tool and take a look at that type, it's quite legible, I'd really like to place some emphasis on the word fun. So we are going to double click on the T for that type layer. We're going to select the word fun, and we're going to increase its point size. And I'm just going to press my up arrow key. If I want to do that faster, I'm going to hold Shift, let go of Shift so I can fine tune it. And my goal is to try and get it to line up to the width of the other letters. So right now, because we made the word fun larger, it's overlapping the other letters in that blurb. So to correct that, we're going to use our character palette, and we're going to increase the leading value. And I'm just using my up arrow key to increase it. And what I'm trying to do is try to make sure that there's about the same amount of space between the bottom of summer and the top of fun as there is between the bottom of keeping and the top of summer, keeping it nice and balanced looking and even looking. So I'm going to reselect my move tool. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit, and that looks pretty balanced. And I'm going to reposition this, thinking about where I'm going to align it. And as long as I keep the type way down here, it's very, very easy to see. But if for some reason I wanted to move it up, now some of the letters, we can't really read them. You know what it says, but someone looking at this for the first time isn't going to be able to read it easily. When you're creating your own magazines, you might run into this problem as well. You might not have the option to just push your blurb text down a little bit to make sure it can be read. Maybe it has to be over an area where there's a lot of contrast, where there's something really white or really light and really dark, and there isn't just one font color that's going to help it stand out against both of those backgrounds. So let's take a look at some of the options that we have in Photoshop to help deal with a situation like this. So right now, my Keeping Summer Fun type layer is selected. Then I'm going to go to this little bonus place, this little options area in the corner of my layers palette. And I'm going to click and select blending options. Now there's a whole bunch of different blending options that are available. And one of the ones that might help us out is the drop shadow blending option. So when I click on it, you can see that what it does is it creates a little shadow effect behind the type, so that if it's against a dark area, the whiteness of the type color keeps the text legible. And then whenever there's white type against a white background, that dark drop shadow helps define the shape of the letters. Now for each of these layer styles, I can just click one on and off. But if I click on the name, then there's all sorts of parameters that I can adjust to change the way it looks. And depending upon the effect, you'll have a different system of sliders and options to tweak the effect, size, all sorts of different ones, so you can tweak it to get exactly the look you want. One of the things you want to avoid when you're using drop shadows in particular is if you change the distance, it just starts to look like now you have a separate piece of type in black, and it's not doing what we want it to do, which is to help define the shape of the letters. We're going to click OK, and we are going to save because we have not done that. I'm going to save it into the magazine tutorial file, and click OK. And now that we know about the blending options, let's use them on a different piece of text and use a different option. We're going to select the nameplate text kiddos, and we're going to add a blending effect to that as well. So we're going to go up into the upper right corner of the Layers palette. We're going to click and hold, select Blending Options, and this time we're going to select Stroke. So I'm going to check it, and you can see that what it does is it adds a little line around the outline of the type. And if we click right on the name stroke, we can change some of the attributes. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the size of the stroke, and we're going to make it thicker, just so it creates a sort of big outline all the way around the type. And click OK. If we look in the Layer palette, you'll notice that it tells us if an effect has been applied to a layer, and it also has a little eye icon. And what's nice about that is it allows me to turn off the effects and turn them back on again, which makes it great for being able to decide, did this look better with the effect or without? If I ever want to edit an effect, let's say I wanted to make the stroke even fatter, I could just double click right on stroke, the layer style opens up and allows me to click and drag and adjust that. I'm going to click cancel because I didn't really want to adjust it. We've almost completed our cover, but I want to change the color of these two blurbs. Black is not very dynamic, it doesn't have a lot of energy. So I'm going to start with the 2018 Summer Guide text. So I'm going to double click on the T in the Layer palette, and I'm going to click on the color chip in the Character palette. And this time, instead of using the slider to change a color, I'm going to move my cursor into the document area, and you'll notice that I have an eyedropper tool, which means I can click on whatever the eyedropper is over, and it will sample color directly from that element. I'll click OK, and I'm going to do the same thing for A Sip of Summer. So I'm double clicking the T, clicking the color chip in the Character palette, moving my cursor into my document area, and clicking on the orange in the nameplate. I click OK, select my Move tool, maybe take a moment to reposition my blurbs, moving that over a bit and up, and this over and up, and press Command S to save. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add the publication date information. Different magazines will present this information different ways depending upon how frequently they publish and a number of different variables, but we're going to keep this simple. We're going to select our Type tool again, and typically we want to place this publication date information very close to the nameplate. But if we click right now anywhere close to the nameplate, there's a good chance that the nameplate text is going to become selected. So what we'll do instead is click far away from any of the other type that we've created and type it out. We're going to say Summer 2018. I'm going to press Command A to select all. I'm going to ask for it to be all caps if it isn't already. And I already know that it's kind of big, so I am going to change the point size. I'm going to select my Move tool and position it roughly where I'd like it to be. And what I'm doing when I'm positioning this and determining the size and location is I'm taking a look at how it relates to the rest of the nameplate. I want it to look balanced. So if you take a look at where the top of the word Summer 2018 is, it's more or less in line with the top of the D. I'm positioning it so it's roughly centered over these last two letters. This whole area creates this nice little space to add in that extra information. I'm not liking the color, so I'm going to double click my T, and I'm going to change the color maybe to the blue, or maybe I'll sample a color from the image itself. I can click anywhere and sample color directly from the photograph. So I'm going to select a color from the water, but you can make any choice you want. So now that we have all the pieces roughed in, I'm going to leave it to you to apply a few final tweaks to your version of this test magazine cover. And when you're done, hand it in.